Hi, I'm Heather Strotter, the host of A Place of Yes, and I just wanted to let you know that this episode is sponsored by Adirondack Trust Company, and it is a conversation with Charlie Waite Jr., who is the president of Adirondack Trust Company. And unlike other episodes where we're talking with families that I've worked directly with through Jake's Help from Heaven, or just people I know in my grief journey, this is really a conversation with someone who has sponsored and supported us. What I think you'll find really interesting is that while we talk about some of the big grief topics, and Charlie shares with me how he felt when his grandmother passed and the impact that has had, we also talk about this relationship between banking and grief. And you don't necessarily think of a bank as someone who can help you through that and support you through that, but in fact, the right bank, and this bank, Adirondack Trust Company, can really help you through all of life's journey, including grief. I hope you enjoy this episode. It's definitely a little different, but I think it's great. Thank you for listening. Welcome to A Place of Yes. I'm your host, Heather Strotter, a podcast about how I moved through my darkest hour. And all I can say is I dug deep, figured out where I was and where I wanted to be. And for me, the answer was in a place of yes. Welcome to the show. But first, it's time for our review of the week. This is a review from Apple Podcast. So thankful to Heather for sharing her experiences. This podcast will be a wonderful support for my clients that are struggling with the devastating heartbreak of the loss of a child. I'm always appreciative of when people make the connection of how they can support people who are having this horrible loss. I love that she thinks that my stories and the stories that we tell, which are stories of grief, but also stories of hope, can be helpful. And I like that connection, and I hope that it's true for her clients. So today I am really excited to be sitting here with Charlie Waite Jr., president of Adirondack Trust Company. Personally, I have loved our relationship with Adirondack Trust Company. You know, just as people who live in Saratoga, you have been our go-to bank. Amshire has been our go-to insurance. You know, you're just our kind of go-to people. And then back when we started Jake's Help from Heaven, it was really a no-brainer for us to do our banking with you guys just because it's what we do. And I should give a little background that Jake's Help from Heaven is a nonprofit started by my husband and I after our son Jake passed away. And what we do there is we try to help others in the area, families that were like ours with individuals that are sick, have disabilities, and just really aim for quality of life. So in those early days, we knew what we wanted to do, but we had no idea how to do it. And I remember when we were first fundraising, reaching out to Rob Ward, and you guys immediately just supporting us. And not supporting us so much because of what we were doing at that point, but just because we were community members. Now that it's been 13 years and it's been such a long relationship and we have grown, I always love those original supporters. So thank you for being one of them.
Thank you. And thank you for your wonderful comments about us. That's what we strive to do at the Adirondack Trust Company. And what our whole mission is about is supporting the community.
You guys do a great job. So can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So, I obviously grew up in the area. In college, I wanted to be a psychologist. I actually had. I worked at the bank. I started off in the maintenance department.
Okay.
And actually, I started before that. I want to say counting pennies in the basement when I was 14. Because back in the day, the schools used to have this fundraiser where it was cover the gym floors in pennies.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think inflation has kind of, made that obsolete. But you used to cover.
Kids today, I mean, Ethan has change and he doesn't want anything to do with it. I'm
right.
like, it's still money,
That's why we have a coin machine at the bank. But in those days, the school districts would bring all that coin to the bank, and it had to be counted by somebody. So I would sit there and now I didn't count it by hand. There was a machine, but you had to babysit the machine, and it got dirty, et cetera, et cetera. You had to clean it. So that was my first job.
Kind of a fun first job.
Yeah. And then I was a custodian, and then I moved up to a teller. So I really worked in all areas of the bank. But when I was in college, I didn't think I wanted to be a banker. I thought I wanted to become a psychologist. But I kind of changed my mind in college and went to law school in New York City, and then became a lawyer in New York City. And when I decided it was time to come home and pursue what our family had done for generations, I did that. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Can you talk a little bit about your family and sort of, for our audience who might not know, just about your history with the bank?
Sure. Yeah. So we, my great grandfather was recruited into the bank, and I'm fourth generation to run the bank. My great grandfather was the first member of the Way family.
I knew it was multiple generations. I didn't realize it was 4. So that's learning something new. What was it like, if this isn't too personal, when you thought you were not going to be involved in the bank? Like, was it always thought that you would work at the bank and become president of the bank?
No, it was too early, for most people to form an opinion. I think it's really important to go out there and have your own success in the world and choose your own path. And then come to it from a place of having had that experience and had that trial by fire, if you will.
Absolutely.
I think most people didn't have a view one way or the other. I did get some comments. I remember one person in particular where I was working at the bank who I had mentioned to him that I was planning to become a psychologist, and they encouraged me rather forcefully to reconsider.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So they're probably laughing now, but it was not really a thing that was discussed either way.
At the risk of being a little cheesy, you just said something that made me think of the title of this podcast, A Place of Yes.
Yeah.
So you were saying, basically that, in order for it to really work or be something that would be beneficial to everyone, it had to come from a place of where you were, where it's what you wanted and where it worked.
Right.
And that is a little bit what this podcast is, a place of yes. And while it has a lot to do with how turning grief into good and all of those things, in my mind, it's really sort of a way of life, right? And everything that comes from, like, for things to be successful, it has to be the right time. It has to be the right moment. That's part of your story, right? And that's why you are here now, because you figured, I don't know, when I was little, I wanted to be a firefighter. That was, like we all have.
Well, I wanted to be a jet fighter pilot before I was now, but with my heart condition, that wasn't going to happen.
Your, Adirondack Trust Company for sure is like pillars of the community in giving back and support. Has that always been that way? Like, is your fourth generation?
Yeah. So I brought some quotes from our founder, actually, Senator Brackett, who is a well-known figure before he helped found the bank. And I think this is helpful to place it a little bit in context. Senator Brackett was a really forward-thinking guy, and he wrote this letter that was in our Time Capsule, actually, for the board of directors 100 years hence. So it gives you a sense of how far ahead that they were thinking. But here's what he said. He said, "We exhort you to see to it that the bank is managed not only for the proper purpose of making money for its stockholders, but also for the development of the community in which it is located, and to be an example of high dealing to all those who come in contact with it." So this philosophy of community service has been around from day one. Yeah.
That's awesome. So. I remember the Time Capsule. When was that?
Yeah, that was only a few years ago. That was 2016.
That was recent, right? Okay.
Yeah, because the Time Capsule was put in there in 1916. So the bank actually started in 1901, but in 1916, when they hit $3 million in total deposits, they decided to build a new banking house, essentially. So that building, the white marble building on Broadway, is not the original building that the bank was in. It was in 1916 that they redid that, and they created this beautiful marble building. And that was the opening of the Time Capsule.
That's awesome.
We pulled
I remember
the stone
that.
out. Yeah.
That's so cool. I remember that. That's great. Do you have a Time Capsule in now for the future?
We do.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I love that kind of stuff. I think that's so fun.
No, it's great. The bank put things in specifically. But
I would be like the weirdo that would put in my favorite sock or something.
Yeah. I think we put the Saratoga quarters, because I think it was around that same time that the Saratoga quarter came out from the mint. So I think we put some of those in there.
That's cool.
So, because we found fractional currency. So back in the day, during the Civil War, they were melting down all of the metal that they could find for the bullets and the guns. Okay. So instead of dimes and quarters back then, they issued fractional paper currency. So you'd have a little 10-cent note. It's a miniature.
Really?
Yeah, it's like the size of a stamp.
That's got to be neat to find.
And of course,
what did you do with the stuff that you found? Did you put it in
it's in archives. Yeah, it's in archives. And we had the letter. I mean, of course, 1916 was right in the middle of World War I. So they had some commentary on that as well.
That's pretty cool. So let's talk a little bit about the support you do in general, right?
Yes,
you guys are constantly giving. And then personally, you're great supporters of Jake's Help from Heaven. And,
Sure.
first with Rob and now with Patrick, I come in with not always straightforward requests, right? Like here we are.
Yeah.
I come in a little bit with like where I think we can best serve our clients and our applicants and, not just the straightforward party. Everyone always meets me with grace, even when my ideas are a little wacky. And I love that. Yeah. So can you talk just about, what it is about Jake's Help from Heaven and any other charities that you guys definitely support?
Well, Jake's Help from Heaven, obviously there's a very tragic story behind that, but the way you have used that tragic story to benefit others is really quite inspiring. And, I think that's part of the reason that it was so easy for us to support it, was that turning something like that into a positive thing is a really inspiring thing.
Thank you. I always say that, part of it is sort of selfish, right? Like,
because
you're a parent, right? What do you love to do? You love to talk about your kids.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
There's always this sort of like elephant in the room about Jake, right?
Yeah.
In this, like I talk all day, every day about Ethan.
Sure.
But it's harder to talk about Jake. So I always say that this to me was like starting this, it gives me this really easy way to talk about Jake and have him be a really present part of not only our family, but really the community to some degree.
Yeah.
I recognize that the work we do is important and potentially even inspirational, but I'm always like, well, it's just a mom talking about her kid.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and as a person who came into this world with his own medical issues, my parents had to deal with that. Now, fortunately, I'm still here, but those are difficult times, and the support that you guys provide to those people going through that is invaluable.
So do you mind talking a little bit about your heart?
Sure. As parents love to talk about their kids, This is something I talk about quite a bit. I have something called transposition of the great arteries. So my aorta and pulmonary, which are the two main ways your blood gets around to your body. Aorta comes out to the body, pulmonary to the lungs, were switched at birth.
Oh, okay.
So I was a blue baby. I wasn't getting oxygen when I was born, so they had to do an emergency operation to basically switch them back.
Okay.
So I have a baffle. So my blood goes the opposite way through my heart, and then through
Okay.
Yeah, and I have a baffle in my top two valves, if you will. There's some ongoing monitoring, and I'm on a series of pills, but otherwise I can live mostly a normal life. I'm not running any marathons, but or climbing Everest. But I'm fortunate enough to be able to live a pretty much normal life. But, obviously when I was born and my parents I had to be trucked immediately down to Albany Med for this emergency surgery, and there was lots of follow-up,
did you have a lot of follow-up when you were a kid and surgeries and things?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe I had a second surgery at 1.5 or 2, and there's annual follow-up, but other than that.
So that is, that's precisely sort of like one of the things we do. We just actually, the last family we spoke to on Sunday, our guests, they did not know. So I'm curious, like they thought they were just having, like they didn't know anything was wrong in utero. Their child had some chromosomal anomalies.
Yeah.
And she is, they had to do a trach, of which she's 14 and still has a trach, still has all these things. We're so fortunate when you're fortunate, right? And it's like, I always say like, we're like one step away from something. And,
absolutely. And one step ahead of the wolf.
Yeah, 100%. And that's something my father would always say. He's like, you have to be generous and you have to give back because we're all one step away from something. You can't
completely
live in this
agree.
bubble where you just think everything's going to be fine because it has been.
Yeah.
So that is honestly, and that's truly the story of Jake. Like he was
fine
up until 8 months fine.
Yeah.
Totally fine. I always say it's like one day I woke up one day, he was fine. And then we went to bed that night and he was not.
Yeah.
And same thing, unfortunately, with his passing. Like when he passed, it was just a day, right?
Yeah.
And everything can just change. Some of the families we help, we're helping for a short time, but sometimes it's something that someone's born with and it's hard to handle in those times and it's a challenge. And some of the families just need support. They need help getting to the doctors and back.
Right.
And, we do travel reimbursement. And sometimes the story has a really happy ending, right? Like you grow up and it's just something that you monitor and life goes on. And other times it's something, but we love that we can kind of scoop in sometimes and just help people in their most vulnerable moments, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm sure for those moments and those first years for your parents they're scary.
Yeah.
You know, it's
well, and that's what we like about helping to support the charity is that you do that kind of work, and that's really valuable for those parents. When you're in your darkest moments of life, having a helping hand is a real booster, not only to your physical situation, but you're also your morale.
No, that is true. In the past 10 days, we've had 2 of our clients, applicants, family members, we call them, pass away.
Yeah.
And in both situations, the parents have sort of reached out to me. They know that I've been there, right?
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of people that you can talk to about that. So it's certainly not it's not our mission or one of like the bullets on our website, but it's kind of a perk of what we do.
An additional function.
An additional function. Like we have walked those shoes. And sometimes dads like to talk to Brian because dads don't tend to talk as much as like moms do about some of this stuff. And these are hard topics. And sometimes, it's someone that they know, and it's not always easy doing it, but you know how much it helps. So it's worth it to do. So the show, as you know, is called A Place of Yes.
Yeah.
And the tagline is channeling grief for good.
Yeah.
And one of the things we talk about a lot is that, we automatically think of grief and you think of someone passing away and, whether it's a family member or a pet or whatever. One of the other ways that have come up in a lot of conversations is that grief isn't only for passing, right? Grief can be this thought of sometimes you grieve the life you thought you were going to have.
Yeah.
It's just kind of an emotion it's often tied into death, but doesn't have to be. Is there any moment in your life that this sort of idea, the place of yes, channeling grief for good, any of that resonates for you or that you would feel comfortable sharing?
Yeah. I mean, I've been very, very fortunate in my life. I haven't had to deal with a lot of those types of situations, but one of the ways I do think about that every day, I mean, obviously, my grandmother passed away recently at 100. And one of the things that I think about when thinking about her is, would whatever it is I'm doing at a particular moment, would that make her proud of me? And I try to channel that into, doing the right thing, essentially.
There's always people, right, who, my mom used to say this, and she would always be like, more when I was a teenager and not always making great choices. She'd be like, would you do it if you were in front of me? Or you know what I mean? If I was watching, and but there are those people that if you imagine them watching you, they just make you better.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And
exactly.
I think that is one of the ways 100% that, grief can make you make better choices.
You keep it in perspective.
Yep. When your grandmother passed, what is that feeling, right? What did grief feel like for you?
We grew up, she babysitted us all the time. I mean, she was like a third parent. So it was pretty hard. You have all these great memories and you realize that you can't interact with that person anymore and feel that. So
I feel like that's one of the hardest things, right? It's when you know that there's never going to be another moment.
Yeah. So, I mean, and, she lived a very full life. 100.
100. That's amazing.
That's great.
Amazing.
And, the amazing things she did in this community wouldn't be the same without her.
Absolutely.
So it was a big loss.
Were your children able to?
They did.
Good? Okay.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they had some time with her, which was great. And I still have some photographs, and I look at those from time to time.
I think it's always so special. I always find that grandmother relationship, grandparent relationship is so special. Like, you're close to them in a different way than your own parents.
Yeah.
And I see it with Ethan and my dad and with my mom, but like he's so close to my dad in a way. And it's just such a great relationship, right? I have found that loss very hard, and I have been lucky that both my parents are still here and hopefully will be for a while. So I don't know that parent loss. That grandparent loss is just, that it's just a special relationship.
It really is.
Ethan only knew my grandmother on my dad's side for the first few years. And he doesn't have great memories of it, but I have these pictures. To me, they mean so much, right?
Yeah,
to him, they
exactly.
mean less because he doesn't have real context for them.
Yeah.
That's great that they were able to have that. I suspect that there is probably some overlap in banking with grief, right? Because sometimes something happens. And we see this with our Jake's families. Like it can just trigger a snowball effect, whether it's loss of job or, the caregiver passed away, like all of these things. I imagine that that's something you interact with at the bank. Like, how do you handle those?
Yeah. So a lot of times what's happening is that someone has passed away and we need to get the paperwork straight, essentially, for the accounts. And so what we try to do with all of our customers all the time, but especially when they're dealing with that, is just to be empathetic, right? They're dealing with a lot of emotions right now, and this is something that they have to deal with. So trying to reduce the friction, the barriers, trying to help them get what they want and what they need, and doing so from a place of understanding. And just training our folks. And most people, giving them the freedom to do that. I mean, most people naturally will just do that in those types of situations, but reinforcing that. And, customer service has always been our number one priority. So it kind of melds right into that.
Well, you can tell that, I'm sort of sidebarring now, but I think about, when I do a lot of the drive-through, but even when I'm in the main branch, but drive-through, you always have the same people working there. Like your staff is very loyal. But I feel like every time I'm at the drive-thru, it's the same girl. So I suspect from that perspective, it's got to be a little bit easier because people obviously like where they work because they stay. It's got to then make it easier in those situations, I would imagine.
Especially when you know somebody. And we really try hard to, foster a sense of community, both amongst our employees and with the general community. And I think that helps us succeed.
It is hard because there's certain people like in the throes of grief, like when someone passes away and stuff that you just have to deal with, right? Like you have to deal with the funeral home and you have to deal with finances and you have to deal with like legal stuff. And it's almost like the hardest things to deal with because you're in those moments. So I do think, I think you guys handle that really well. And I'm sure that it can't always be easy, right? Because people aren't in their finest.
No.
So it's like you're more.
Yeah. Just having some understanding.
Yeah. And knowing that if someone's being combative, it's not, it's more circumstantial than.
Yeah.
A lot of times people don't think of banking as a very like empathetic or emotional or, it's kind of cut and dry. At the risk of being corny, I do think you guys do things differently for the reasons you spoke and for other reasons. But can you talk about that? Like, how do you guys create this community, not only, like you said, like with your staff, which is obviously resonates with the way they do their job, but also as a big part of the community?
I think a big part of that is accessibility, right? I sit on the balcony. Means anybody can come up and see me at any time. People can talk to people. We answer the phone. When you think about it, when you dial, a big company, forget about just banking, any big company, what do you get immediately? The robot.
And it makes me crazy. Actually,
the robot.
I have this story. So this is a perfect, I'm going to stop you for 1 second because this is this week. Some of our family members, had a child pass away. One of the things Jake's does is we write them. We kind of treat it as like, if you were an applicant of ours, you're part of our family, and we do one last gift. We do a bereavement gift. So we send the family $1,500. I had sent it. This one mom was trying to cash it. They couldn't cash it because she didn't have an account at the bank. So then the bank called. I missed the call. So it was one of these comedy of errors.
Yeah.
But long story short, I called back, connected with someone. They sent an email to the entire, all of the branches, sent to all of the branches. So no matter where she went back, she would be able to cash it. And it was such a hard situation, right? Because the moment, and I was like, I feel terrible that I didn't pick up the call the first time. She had So it was one of these things. I called, and you sort of I dread having to make phone calls in today's world, right? Because you're never going to get a human. You're going to be transferred 87 times. You're going to have to tell your story 87 times. I called, picked up the phone. They were like, oh, okay, Mrs. Strotter, let me help you, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. It was handled in like 4 minutes.
Right.
Kudos to that. You guys, you're on the balcony and you pick up the phone. I love it.
And so we pick up the phone when people answer the call. We don't have answering machines. And anybody can come see me. So when people see me doing that and talking to customers, they realize that, I care about customer service deeply. Yeah. And so they kind of model that behavior.
I had told the story, I think, in the ad about Ethan opening his first account. And your predecessor came down and shook his hand. And it was just this moment, right? Like he felt like $1 million. It was great. But I love that, that it's such a visible place to be seen.
The first thing that people mention is the noise, right? Because we have coin machines, we have currency machines, those and it's a big vaulted ceiling. So you can get a little bit of an echo, but after, a month, it becomes background noise. You don't even notice it. Yeah.
I love that you brought that up because I do think that's a huge part of what does make you guys different, like not just in banking, just as a company in general, right?
Right.
You walk in and there's the president right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
How often is it on a top floor or in a different room or, behind closed doors? So I love that. I think it's
helpful the other thing that's helpful is, when I joined the bank, my father had me go through every department of the bank. So I really learned every job. And I'd already been a teller, so I knew how the tellers operated and what kinds of things that they had to deal with as well. So you can kind of put yourself in your employee's shoes a little bit and understand what they're going through when they have to.
I'm glad you brought that up because when you were saying that the first time, I very much related to that. So your dad did that probably very purposefully, right?
Of course, yeah.
So, my family's in the hotel business.
Right.
And when I was growing up, my first job, they used to have the Turf Inn on Wolf Road.
Yep.
My first job, my dad had me walk around the parking lot, and that was a big property. I had to walk around with one of those picks and pick up cigarette butts.
Uh-huh.
No, he said, you just don't walk in here and get the top job.
Right.
You go up the ranks and that was, I remember I went around and I picked, it was disgusting, right? Like cigarette butts. And this was like in the 80s when people were still smoking a lot. So I went around, picked them all up. I went into his office and I was like, okay, Dad, I'm done. He's like, I'm sure people have smoked again. Do another lap.
Yeah. Oh, I have cleaned some things that I could not mention on this podcast out of our drive-through. So, yeah, I feel where you're coming from there.
But there is something about that too, though, right? You know all the positions.
Yes.
You know the worst jobs there, and it makes you really understand. And
right.
No, I love that. And like I said, I deeply relate to that. And frankly, we've had Ethan do that, right? Like Ethan and his friends over this Christmas break, there's a renovation happening at one of our hotels, and Brian takes those very seriously, right? When he's in there, I make fun of him a little bit. I'm like, you think you're a construction worker, but you're not. But he gets there early. He's in his work boots. Yeah. He has been working like renovation for the last couple months. And when Ethan was home, he was working renovation. Mm-hmm. We are fortunate that that's not what we have to do all the time.
Sure.
But it's important to know how to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And to appreciate what others deal with when they're doing those 100%. Jobs so that when they come to you with issues, you come from a place of understanding.
100%. So is there anything else that I haven't asked you that you'd like to share or that you've thought about?
No, other than just thanking you for doing what you do and being on this podcast with me. I appreciate it and all the things you do.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for being a guest on this. We very much appreciate your support always, particularly with this podcast. You guys are our launch sponsors. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to A Place of Yes. Please follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Leave us a thumbs up or leave us a comment. We would appreciate all that you can do. If you really like this episode, please share it with a friend or two. For more information and to leave us any feedback, please reach out to us at jakeshelpfromheaven.org.